everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. It's your boy Shifty coming at you with another one. Today we are going to talk about how we can replace our top 3 pending free agents. We're going to look at some draft options, some free agent options, and some options in-house. Before we get into that video though, I want to give a shout out to CG Ruthless. I was just on his channel doing a live stream. It was a whole lot of fun. I'm going to put a link to his channel in the description. Check him out. And without further ado, let's get into the video. The first player that I want to talk about is going to be Laken Tomlinson. What are some of the options that we could look at should he leave in free agency? Now here, I'm going to be looking mostly at free agent options, not so much the draft. There aren't really many guys available in the draft who I think could immediately step in and fill that left guard role. So, first player that comes to mind is going to be James Daniels from the Chicago Bears. Went to the University of Iowa, was drafted in the second round. Now he's 6'4", 327, so he's got excellent size, and when you consider his athleticism, it's impressive that he can move that well at that size. He's still very, very young. After 4 years in the league, he's going to be 25 at the start of this season, so he's got a lot of prime years. Let's say if he were to be signed to a 4 or 5 year deal, by the end of that, he would still be 29, maybe 30, so still got a lot of great football ahead of him. Now, what I do like about James Daniels is something that we see from Laken Tomlinson. So in 2021 and 2019, he played 100% of the snaps for the Chicago Bears offense. So you know that he is quite durable. The big thing too is that he is a scheme fit. He comes from that, playing in Iowa, that's a very pro style offense, but even with the Chicago Bears. Now say what you want about Matt Nagy, they run a very good, solid offense, but they actually ask their offensive linemen to do a lot of similar things that we ask our guys to do here in San Francisco. And I think considering his athleticism, he would fit in perfectly at left guard. You put him between Trent Williams and Alex Mack, and I think he would be a seamless fit. Now the downsides are he's probably going to be quite a bit more expensive than Laken Tomlinson, simply because when you factor in his age, he is durable, but he has missed some time also throughout his relatively short career. So it's definitely, there are some risks to it. It's not going to be just a simple plug and play because you just never know what can happen. Also, when you bring out an outside free agent, there are obviously, you do have to change and adapt to your new team, coaching, and environment. The other guy I want to talk about, who would definitely be a cheaper option but not a bargain bin by any means, would be Lucas Patrick from the Green Bay Packers. Now he's 6'3", 313, so still got relatively good size. He'll be 29 by the start of the season, so definitely a little bit older than James Daniels, but still younger than Laken Tomlinson. Now, when you actually look at his 2020 and 2021 seasons combined, he actually played 86% of the offensive snaps for the Green Bay Packers. And of course, we know Green Bay has been very, very strong. Their offensive line, I think, has actually outperformed what many people have done, especially when you consider that David Bakhtiari hasn't really been there for 2021 and he missed the end of 2020. When you look at that, playing for Green Bay, playing under Matt LaFleur, he's clearly a scheme fit. Both Fleur and Shanahan do a lot of the same concepts. They ask a lot of the same out of their offensive linemen, so it's a relatively natural fit there. Now, here's the thing. He definitely has a lot more experience at right guard. So if we were to bring in someone like a Lucas Patrick, could we then maybe plug him in at right guard and maybe move Aaron Banks to left guard, or maybe look to fill left guard in the draft or something else like that? That remains to be seen. Now, he's been in the league for quite a while, so maybe he would be able to slide right in at left guard, especially when you put him in between 2 potentially future Hall of Famers in Trent Williams and Alex Mack. So that's something to think about. Now, I do think he'd be a little bit more affordable than James Daniels and possibly Laken Tomlinson, but there is that thing where he has experience more at right guard, where we definitely need to fill that left guard position should Laken Tomlinson leave. Now, some other options that we could look at very quickly to fill this position. We could look to bring back Daniel Brunskill. Now, Brunskill would come back on a very cheap deal. He is someone who has experience playing basically on every position on the offensive line. Would it be the ideal solution? No, but it is one that's out there. If we are looking to the draft, there's a couple of guys I want to talk about. Cole Strange from Chattanooga, then we have Donovan West from Arizona State. Both guys who do fit the profile of a zone blocking guard, but these guys, it's going to ask a lot of them. They're going to be basically mid-round picks to just come in right away and start at left guard. For a team like the 49ers that have Super Bowl aspirations, that would not be an ideal scenario. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think Laken Tomlinson is the number one priority. I think we have to bring him back just because to keep that consistency on the offensive line, which to me is massive. So, I just wanted to throw out some other options there for how we could potentially replace Laken Tomlinson should he leave in free agency. The second player I want to talk about is going to be DJ Jones. This is a guy who I have just completely raved about. I think he's developed so well in this defense. It would definitely be a shame to see him go, but it honestly wouldn't surprise me. He's fit for so many teams that have a lot of cap space, so I just think that we might be priced out of bringing him back. Hopefully we can, and maybe he'll take a discount to stay with a team that's incredibly competitive and should be competing for a Super Bowl next year, as opposed to maybe taking the paycheck and going to like the Jets or the Dolphins, who aren't as in good a position as we are. Now, how could we replace him? Well, the first option, I'm actually going to look in-house, and that's Javon Kinlaw. Now, Javon Kinlaw was drafted 14th overall in the first round. All 49er fans know about Kinlaw. Bummer with Kinlaw is obviously he has major durability concerns. He did get that surgery to hopefully fix his knee issues, but those are knee issues that were lingering, so we just really don't know exactly how he will look going forward. However, the positives with Kinlaw, his size, 6'5", 319, he is a monster. He was so good at South Carolina and had some really good moments in his rookie year. It seemed like last season the knee was just bothering him the whole time. Now, the positives also with Kinlaw are he clearly has experience in this scheme. He has experience with this coaching staff with Kasorik, and he's been put in a pretty not so great situation with COVID, with lingering injury issues. So I think if he can come in, be fully healthy, and he's already actually training right now at the 49ers practice facility, he could be due for a monster breakout year. His potential is through the roof, and another big positive too is that his contract is already on the books, so we wouldn't actually be spending crazy money to bring someone in to replace him, and we could use that money elsewhere, maybe improving the secondary or wide receiver or otherwise. So Kinlaw, I think, is a really solid option in-house. So in free agency, a guy I like is B.J. Hill. So he's 6'4", 315. Now, he's been drafted by the Giants in the third round, then got traded to the Bengals. He'll be 27 by the start of the season, so still very young. Last season, he had some really impressive numbers. 5.5 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, 12 quarterback hits. Now, the big thing that I like is that, clearly the Bengals brought in... They have Sam Hubbard there, and then they brought in the other edge rusher whose name is completely slipping my mind, Trey Hendrickson. So he played in a defense with a DJ Reader on the defensive line with a lot of talent around him, and he was able to put up good numbers. Now, coming to San Francisco, it would be a very similar story, playing on the same defensive line as Javon Kinlaw, who's here regardless, but more so Eric Armstead, Nick Bosa, Charles Omenihu, Ebukam, all these guys that were really, really impressive. I think he could put up consistent production. He'd be coming to a scheme which will allow him to be very aggressive and utilize his skills in a great way. Of course, not as familiar with our scheme necessarily, and he could come at about a very similar cost to DJ Jones. So at that point, you're thinking, why not just bring back Jones? So that's like one of the downfalls. But should Jones command a much bigger contract than we expect, BJ Hill, I think, is a very good replacement possibility. Now, in the draft, there's a guy who I really like, and that's Perrion Winfrey from Oklahoma. Here's the thing with him. We would probably have to trade up for him. He's probably going to be a guy who will go end of the first, early second, although I think he's a perfect fit. He's someone that we would definitely have to jump up to get, and considering we gave up so much draft capital for Trey Lance, I just don't know if that's going to be on the cards right now. Other guys that we could look to honestly bring back would be Maurice Hurst Jr. He was injured pretty much all last year with the 49ers. He did have flashes in preseason and in training camp, so that could be an option to bring back on a very cheap one-year deal. Other guys we could look to bring back are going to be Kevin Givens, Kentavious Street, and then another 49er, ex-49er who we could also bring back, who we might remember from 2019, would be Sheldon Day, defensive tackle. plays with the Cleveland Browns from Notre Dame, but has played in our defense before. So that's another possibility as a very cheap replacement for DJ Jones. Ultimately, look, of course, I want to bring back Laken Tomlinson. Of course, I want to bring back DJ Jones, but we'll see how the finances work out. But I think there are some pretty solid options out there should Jones leave in free agency. And the third player that I'm going to talk about is going to be Raheem Mostert. Now, Mostert is someone who I'm very, very conflicted on because he's a guy who obviously has had a lot of success in this offense, but he's had a very notable injury history. We saw what he can do in this offense, but you know what they say, some of the best abilities are availability, and that's where Mostert, it's definitely a risky thing if we were to give him a contract worth any significant money. So let's say if Mostert were to depart in free agency, where could we look to replace him? Well, ultimately, I think we do have some really good options already in-house. I mean, I love Elijah Mitchell. I think Trey Sermon, has a chance to really bounce back after a shaky rookie year. And then I think JaMychal Hasty is pretty solid. It's pretty notorious in this offense where they're able to get excellent production from, like undrafted free agents or late round picks. I mean, we can just look at Elijah Mitchell. Raheem Mostert was undrafted too. So you don't really want to go and invest a ton of draft capital or cap space in the running back position in San Francisco. But a couple of guys I like. J.D. McKissic played last season with the Washington Commanders. He's someone who is an excellent receiver, and that's something that Mitchell and Sermon are not so great at. Hasty's pretty good, but if you think about McKissic, he's had 123 catches in the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 123 catches. That's insane. I think you could come in on a pretty cheap 1-year deal. As a career average, 4.4 yards per carry career average, so that is pretty solid too. Hasn't really fumbled that much. In 2020, he had 3 fumbles, but beyond that, hasn't fumbled the ball. And that's something that I think any offensive-minded coach would be really harping on, that you don't want to give up the fumbles, and that's something that he rarely has done. Bummer, though, with McKissic is he'll be 29 by the start of the season, so he's not exactly young. I think on a 1-year deal could be an option similar to when we brought in like a Wayne Gallman last year. Even though we ended up cutting Gallman, I think McKissic could be someone who looks at San Francisco thinking, hey, I could go there on a cheap deal, maybe put up some big numbers, and then who knows, like maybe they get like a decent contract going somewhere else. But it's notorious for Kyle Shanahan to be able to get great production out of running backs. So I think San Francisco is a very sought-after destination for free agent running backs. In the draft, there's a guy that I like. It's Rachaad White from Arizona State. Now, clearly, we like Arizona State's offense. We drafted Brandon Ayuk, and so far, Ayuk has been very, very good for us. He's an ideal zone running back. Like the scheme they run there and the way he runs will be a really, really good fit here. Also, he's very good at catching the ball. I think that's something that, again, our main guys are lacking somewhat, where we just really need that running back who can, catch a pass out of the backfield and just take it to the house. So Rachaad White could be one of those guys. He does have that second gear speed as well, so like he can kind of get through the hole and then bam, he takes off and then he's gone. So that's something that you really like to see in running backs as well. Here's the thing. To get White, he's probably going to be in that maybe 3rd, 4th round range, and I think that's going to be, I just don't know if the value is there. Again, like we see so often with Shanahan that we get great production out of late round picks. So to give up, we just spent a 3rd round pick last year in Sermon. We got a 6th round pick of Elijah Mitchell, and just look at that. That's Exhibit A. Mitchell looking great, Sermon so-so. So I think it might be a bit redundant to force another like mid-round pick on a running back where there's guys in the later rounds who I think could be potentially just as successful, if not more so. Now, looking at some other options to replace Raheem Mostert, in the draft, I really like CJ Verdell from Oregon. I think he's a guy who could be drafted in the 7th round. We have 3 7th-round picks, maybe a 6th-round pick, but I think 7th, and who could come in and just be, again, another just gem that we find later in the draft. As for free agents that we could look to bring in to replace Mostert, someone that I've talked about a couple of times on this channel is Marlon Mack. He's had a couple of very good years in the NFL. I think he could come in here on a relatively cheap deal. He's still very young. So again, San Francisco, I think, is a good situation for someone like that to come in, where maybe Mitchell gets hurt and then he has a huge season and then makes big money elsewhere. The last guy is a guy that we are actually all familiar with, and another example of how we can get production out of late round picks and undrafted free agents, and that's Matt Breida. I know Matt Breida had some fumbling issues towards the end of his time with San Francisco, but as a guy who knows our scheme inside out, has had success in it, I think as our number 3 or 4 running back option, I really wouldn't mind bringing back Matt Breida. So that's going to about sum it up, guys. I just wanted to talk about, should our top 3 free agents end up leaving and not coming back, just some options that we have to replace them. And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on my suggestions for how we could replace them. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, how we could replace these 3 key players who we could potentially leave. And at that, I'm going to leave it there for the video. Thank you for all the likes, the subscriptions, and the comments. It's awesome to interact with it. And it's a really exciting time to be a 49ers fan. And I'm going to leave it there. So I'm going to say 2 things, and you guys know what they are. The butt counts, and I'm going to catch y'all on the flip side.